The shadows marked the city had always feared the dark, but now, the darkness feared something even worse. Chapter 1. The first shadows. The city had long been silent at night, but lately, that silence had taken on a sinister edge. A series of gruesome murders had shaken its streets, leaving behind only whispers of a nameless killer. Fear spread like wildfire, and no one knew who would be next. Detective David had seen many horrors in his career, but this was different. The victims, always women, were found in the darkest alleys, their bodies eerily arranged in what seemed like a twisted ritual. No signs of struggle, no fingerprints, nothing, except for a single black rose placed gently on each corpse. "This isn't just a murderer," David murmured as he examined the latest crime scene. "This is someone with a message, but what are they trying to say?" Chapter 2. The man in the shadows. Across the city, in a dimly lit basement, a man sat hunched over an old leather notebook. His name was Edward, and his hands moved steadily as he wrote, each word carefully chosen, like an artist crafting his masterpiece. "They call me a monster," he wrote. "They don't understand. I am not chaos, I am order. I am not death, I am rebirth." Edward leaned back in his chair, a cold smile playing on his lips. The city was his canvas, and he was far from finished painting. Chapter 3. The unraveling mystery. David and his team worked tirelessly, analyzing every detail, but the killer was always one step ahead. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no patterns, until now. David sat at his desk, staring at a large map of the city, his fingers tracing over the marked locations of the murders. Then, realization struck. "These aren't random," he whispered. "The crime scenes formed an irregular circle, a shape with deliberate intent. But why?" His eyes narrowed. He searched historical landmarks within the pattern and found one common point: an abandoned library at the city's heart. "This is where he's leading us," David said, grabbing his coat. "This is where it ends." Chapter 4. The trap is set. That night, David approached the abandoned library with caution. The air was thick with dust, the wooden shelves looming like silent tombstones. Gun in hand, he moved deeper into the darkness. Then, he saw it, an open door at the back, light flickering beyond it. Inside, the walls were covered in strange symbols. Candles burned in a ritualistic formation. And in the center of the room, a chair. A man was waiting for him. "Edward, you took your time, detective," Edward said with a smirk, his voice eerily calm. David aimed his gun. "It's over." But Edward didn't flinch. Instead, he reached under the table and pressed a hidden switch. The room erupted into flames. Chapter 5. Fire and shadows. The fire spread instantly, thick smoke curling into the air. David lunged forward, but Edward had already vanished into the shadows, his laughter echoing through the burning library. Coughing, David barely escaped, collapsing onto the cold pavement outside as the flames devoured the evidence, the answers he had been seeking. But Edward was gone, and the city would never be the same again. Chapter 6. The unfinished story. Days passed, but Edward was never found. Some said he had burned in the fire. Others whispered that he was still out there, watching. The city moved on, but fear lingered. One evening, in a quiet alley, a woman sat on a bench, engrossed in a book. She barely noticed the tall figure approaching her. "Good evening," the man said softly. She looked up, hesitant. "Who are you?" He glanced at the title in her hands and smiled. "Just someone who enjoys dark stories." And then, just like that, he disappeared into the night, leaving behind only the chilling promise of something unfinished. The end, or just the beginning? Epilogue. The return of the shadow. The city thought it was safe. The news called the fire an accident. The police declared the case closed. And for a while, the nightmares faded, until the bodies started appearing again. This time, there were no black roses, no symbols, no patterns, just blood, too much of it. The killings were messier, more brutal, as if the murderer no longer cared about precision, as if he wanted chaos. Detective David hadn't slept in days. He sat in his dark apartment, the only light coming from his desk lamp, illuminating a single photograph. The latest victim. Her face was frozen in terror, her body marked with deep, deliberate cuts. Then, the envelope arrived. It had no name, no address, just a single black fingerprint on the seal. Heart pounding, David tore it open. Inside was a single note, written in the same elegant handwriting he had seen in Edward's leather notebook. "Did you miss me?" David's blood turned cold. From the shadows outside his window, unseen eyes were watching. The game was far from over. And this time, the city would drown in fear. To be continued. in Part 2, The Shadow's Revenge.